Committee's third oversight hearing of the United States Capitol Police, and the fifth Rules Committee hearing addressing the issues following the January 6th attack on the Capitol. I would like to thank my friend Ranking Member Blunt and our colleagues for being here today. Thank you, Senator Leahy, for being here today. You've played a major leadership role with your the Appropriations Committee in getting the emergency supplemental funding that we needed after January 6th. I especially want to thank our witness, Capitol Police Chief Thomas Manger, who joined the department nearly 6 months ago after a lifetime in law enforcement and is appearing before our committee today for the first time. And we are, of course, grateful to the men and women of the Capitol Police for the work that they do every single day. Tomorrow marks 1 year since a violent mob staged an insurrection in an attempt to disrupt the peaceful transition of power while Congress was gathered to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election. That mob desecrated our Capitol, the temple of our democracy, and delayed the counting of the electoral votes. But thanks to the heroism of the people that work with you, Chief, thanks to our brave law enforcement officers, we were able to finish our work. I will never forget walking down to the House chamber from the Senate floor with my friend Senator Blunt and Vice President Pence. It was 3:30 a.m. 3:30 a.m. And we walked through that hallway, broken glass on the sides, spray paint on the statues, remembering that just that day earlier we had done this joyful walk for what is every 4 years the peaceful transition to power, no matter who wins, Democrat or Republican. And there we were, alone in that hallway with two young women holding the mahogany box that had the last remaining electoral ballots up to the state of Wyoming. While it was a sorrowful day, and you lost officers, and we had so many people injured, I had this moment of thinking as we walked down that hallway, in the end, because of the bravery of your officers, democracy prevailed. Many of us remember that insurrection for what it was, an attack on our democracy. But it was also, as we'll talk about today, a brutal and prolonged physical attack for the law enforcement officers who risked their lives to defend the Capitol that day. Tragically, 5 officers who reported for duty have since passed away, including Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the day after the attack. 4 other officers died in the days and months that followed. Capitol Police Officer Howard Liebengood, D.C. Metropolitan Police Officers Jeffrey Smith, Gunther Hishida, and Kyle DeFreitag. And of course, we all remember Billy Evans, who died in an incident unrelated to this attack. Many more suffered physical injuries, and even more sustained emotional trauma from the events of that day. We owe it to the Capitol Police officers who defend the Capitol every day to make sure that they have the resources and support they need to do their jobs. That's why in the immediate aftermath of the attack, this committee convened a series of hearings, Senator Blunt and I, on a bipartisan basis, with every single member of this committee involved, Democrat and Republican, joined forces with the Homeland Security Committee and held these hearings. Out of that came a bipartisan report that Senator Blunt and Senator Peters and Portman and I authored, with findings and 20 recommendations for agencies across the federal government to be implemented without delay. As we approach this solemn anniversary, today we will hear, I know because I've read your testimony, that significant progress has been made to implement the recommendations that pertain to the Capitol Police. And I thank you and all your officers for that. The changes made since January 6th, of course, started at the top. We said the Capitol Police Board must appoint a new police chief, and they selected you in July. We also have 2 new sergeant-at-arms in the Senate. Leader Schumer appointed General Karen Gibson, who just finished a term as board chair and who has worked to put recommendations in place. In the House, Speaker Pelosi appointed General William Walker, who led the D.C. National Guard on January 6th, and in fact has testified before this committee in that role. As I note, on January 6th, we saw 75% of officers on duty forced to defend the Capitol in their regular uniforms, in plain clothes. In some cases, they had less protective gear than the insurrectionists themselves. That's why we recommended that the Capitol Police have enough officers with appropriate training and equipment. And in July, as I note, President Biden signed emergency funding legislation led in the Senate by Chairman Leahy to deliver resources to do exactly that. We also saw the former police chief that day delayed for over an hour trying to get approval to call in the National Guard. In an absurd situation, he was trying to reach the sergeant-at-arms in order to follow the law, who in fact were trying to defend their own chambers at a time when shots had been fired and people had been killed. Senator Blunt and I introduced a bill along with a number of other members of this committee, including Senators King, Wicker, Feinstein, Capito, Merkley, Padilla, and Warner. And it was signed into law this month to make it easier for you, Chief, to call in the National Guard if ever such an emergency situation would arise again. We will never forget, also, the haunting words of an officer desperately calling over the radio that day in the middle of the insurrection, "Does anyone have a plan? Does anyone have a plan?" The answer, sadly, that day was no. So we recommended that the Capitol Police produce a department-wide operational plan for all large-scale events at the Capitol, and that is now standard procedure. No will never be the answer again. We also heard how officers on the front lines were left without critical information. We said the department needed to take significant action to improve its handling of intelligence, and it has worked to ensure information is shared with rank-and-file officers. So while there is so much to do, including, as we know, hiring multiple additional officers, and I'm sure you'll be asked about that today, as well as making sure the department is equipped to respond to the dramatic increase in threats against members of Congress, which have now exceeded, by your reports, over 9,000 in the last year, more than we have ever seen, double, triple what we have seen, completely related to what we saw on January 6th. And that, of course, is a challenge for your department to respond to. To close, I will note that while today we will discuss the steps that have been taken and the work that lies ahead to ensure the security of our nation's capital, there must also be more done to safeguard the future of our very democracy. I continue to support the work of the House Select Committee to bring the underlying causes of the insurrection to light, to hold people accountable for what happened. And it is crucial as ever, in addition to that we pass legislation to protect the freedom to vote in the Senate. Because at this moment, we are dealing with a slew of laws that have either been introduced or passed around the country, major overhauls to legislation that make it harder for people to vote. It is as if what wasn't accomplished with bear spray or bayonets is now being attempted to be accomplished through laws that limit voting on weekends, laws that limit ballot drop boxes to one in a major city, laws that literally disband nonpartisan voting boards to be replaced by partisan counting of the votes. That's what we're seeing across the country right now. It is not the subject of this hearing, but it is clearly related to what happened on January 6th. With that, we look forward to hearing from you, Chief Major, about the progress you have made and the work still to be done. And now I will turn it over to my good friend, Senator Roy Blunt, and I thank him again on a bipartisan basis for working through, and this entire committee, what we needed to do to make the security recommendations for changes, the funding for changes, the legal provisions for changes, as well as the respect and dignity that your officers deserved and deserve every day. Thank you, Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I know that Senator Schumer is on a tight schedule this morning. Are you sure? Well, thank you, Senator Klobuchar. I'm glad to be here today, and I'm glad we have the chance to thank Chief Major for joining us and for the leadership he's already provided to the Capitol Police. The January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol was a tragic day for our country, Everyone who took part in that attack should be prosecuted based on their actions and plans. That process continues, and I support it. As we approach today's one-year anniversary of the attack, it's important we keep the Capitol Police officers and those from other responding agencies, including the D.C. Metropolitan Police, who were here within minutes and made an incredible difference in the ability to respond, along with the National Guard, federal law enforcement, and others who we really need to keep in the front of our minds as we have this discussion today with the chief. You know, the U.S. Capitol is our most iconic symbol of democracy. The whole world was watching to see how we responded to the attack. These officers were the true heroes of January 6th. They defended the Capitol and everyone who works here bravely and without hesitation. Thanks to their efforts, as Senator Klobuchar just pointed out, we were able to return to the Senate and House chambers and finish our work. We're able to show the world that when our system is tested, it will prevail. My colleagues and I are profoundly grateful for the Capitol Police's continued dedication to the mission to protect the Congress. It's our job to honor their service by doing our part to ensure that they are never faced with the circumstances they were faced with that day. The committee's held a number of hearings with respect to the events of January 6th. This is the fifth of those hearings. Throughout those hearings and in our subsequent actions, Chairman Klobuchar and I are proud of the bipartisan way that we've been able to move forward to show that we want to ensure the Capitol Police have the resources necessary to protect both the Congress and the agency's most valuable asset, the officers themselves. Senator Klobuchar and I introduced legislation with many of our colleagues on this committee, which passed both the House and Senate by unanimous consent and was signed into law by the President on December the 22nd. This legislation, the Capitol Police Emergency Assistance Act of 2021, provides the Capitol Police Chief with unilateral authority to request emergency assistance from the National Guard and other federal law enforcement agencies in emergencies. As I previously mentioned, we held a number of hearings on this subject and released a bipartisan report with Homeland Security and the Government Affairs Committee in June of 2021, which outlined several recommendations based on extensive interviews with key decision makers, firsthand account from law enforcement personnel, and the review of thousands of documents. We've continued to pursue more information on this issue. We've also worked with our colleagues on the Emergency Security Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021 to provide the department with additional and necessary funding for salaries, overtime pay, trauma support, riot control equipment for all officers, and specialized training. Certainly, Chairman Leahy's leadership on that piece of legislation, along with Senator Shelby, made a big difference in quickly responding to what was the immediate need of the department after the increased workload and the stress of what happened a year ago. Beyond the work of Congress, the Capitol Police have been reviewing operations and looking at necessary changes within the department. We've twice heard from the Inspector General, including last month as he concluded his 11-month investigation in the department's preparations for and response to the events of January 6th. I appreciate today's opportunity to hear from Chief Manger on the security enhancements the department has made over the past year, the work being done to improve officer morale and retention, as well as the chief's observations after 6 months in command and his goals and visions for the department moving forward. 1 year after January the 6th, 2021, we acknowledge that there's been considerable progress, but also acknowledge, as I'm sure the chief does from his comments today, that much work remains to be done. We'll continue to work together to ensure the department addresses its critical needs and is positioned to be better trained, better equipped, and better prepared in the future. We owe that to the frontline USCP officers who protect members of Congress, congressional officers, employees, and visitors to the Capitol every day. We also, by the way, owe that to their families. Chief Manger, Thank you for being here with us today. I look forward to hearing from you as you reflect on the changes the department has made over the past year and what work remains to be done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Now, thank you, Senator Schumer. And when you were, I know you were busy with something else, Senator Schumer, but I did mention that your leadership in making sure we got a sergeant in arms in place who's doing a very good job. So thank you for that. And thank you for your leadership. Senator Schumer.
Well, thank you. And let me thank the chair of the Rules Committee, my good friend, Senator Klobuchar, for the great work she has done in this regard in making our Capitol much safer. And let me thank my friend, the ranking member, for his bipartisan cooperation on this important issue. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak right now. I also want to thank today's witness, U.S. Capitol Chief of Police Thomas Manger. 2021 was one of the hardest years ever for our Capitol Police. But Chief Manger has done an outstanding job in his first few months ushering necessary reforms to the department. He'll be the first to say the job is not done, but today the Capitol is a whole lot safer than it was a year ago, and I commend him for his leadership. I feel safe walking around the halls of this hallowed building. My colleagues, we're here today because 1 year ago, the men and women of our Capitol Police stood on the front lines of the unthinkable in America, a violent assault upon the U.S. Capitol, instigated by former President Trump and carried out by a mob of radicals looking to halt the peaceful transfer of power. I remember January 6th as if it were yesterday. I've said repeatedly over the last year my experience that day was sort of like Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. The best of times because at 4 a.m. that morning, we had learned, those of us on the Democratic side anyway, that Senators Warnock and Ossoff had won, and we would come back into the majority. I couldn't sleep. Got in my car at 7:30, got here at 12:30, got on the floor of the Senate at 1 p.m. as we began to count the votes. I was only on the floor of the Senate for about an hour as the putative majority leader, not even having given a speech, when a police officer in a bulletproof vest and with a submachine gun strapped across his waist grabbed me firmly by the collar like this. I'll never forget that grip. He said, "Senator, we're in danger. We got to get out of here." He had to explain to me what the danger was. I didn't know. None of us knew at that time. We walked through a hallway, went through a door, and this was shown on the video camera that was captured, and they used it at the impeachment trial. I hadn't seen it until they did it then. But they show me walking briskly with police officer on either side down a hallway. We go through a door. You don't see us for 20 seconds, and then we're running out at full speed. I was within 30 feet of these nasty insurrectionists. Had one of them had a gun, had two of them blocked off the door, Lord knows what would have happened. So that was quite a day. And it was even a tougher day, much tougher, for our Capitol Hill policemen. They were outnumbered, they were under-equipped, yet their bravery, their quick thinking saved many lives and prevented a violent riot from becoming something even worse. It allowed us, when the four leaders met and decided we were going to not let these insurrectionists stop us from going forward with the counting of the ballots, it allowed us to come back that night at 8 p.m. and actually finish the counting, having the insurrectionists' object that day to stop the count fail. So today we honor those who stepped up that day, and especially those whom we've lost in the aftermath. We remember them and pray for their families. Now, in the years since that attack, as has been mentioned, we've gotten a lot done in the Senate to strengthen our Capitol Police, to assure, from a security standpoint, that the violence of that day never happens again. Early last year, I put in place a new Sergeant-at-Arms, Lieutenant General Karen Gibson, a wonderfully competent person with a great deal of experience on both the organizational side as well as on the intelligence side. And we installed the first all-women leadership team in the history of the Senate Sergeant-at-Arms. As a member of the Capitol Police Board, Ms. Gibson led a diligent search and helped us find the new police chief who sits here today. It was so important to me that we had a new police chief who was competent, experienced, and dedicated. I am proud that we have found such an individual in J. Thomas Manger. Last summer, we did a few other things. We passed a critical supplemental funding led by Senator Leahy and Senator Shelby, providing tens of millions in overtime pay, funding for more police officers, hazard pay, and retention of bonuses for the Capitol Police. And just last month, we passed legislation authorizing the chief to summon the National Guard in future emergencies without prior authorization. We all know what we went through that day, trying to get the National Guard to come quickly. Thanks to his work, the chief's work, and the new leadership of the Capitol Police, the U.S. today is much safer than it was a year ago, although we're continuing to work on that vital job of the safety of this Capitol. But let's be clear. Let's be very clear. January 6th was not merely a census act of mob violence that sprung up spontaneously. It was an attempt to reverse, through violent means, the outcome of a free and fair election, and make no mistake, the root cause of January 6th is still with us today. It is the big lie, pushed by Donald Trump, that is undermining faith in our political system and making our democracy, our country, less safe. The biggest threat to our Capitol Police, and our democracy is the insidious motives stemming from the big lie, propagated by the former president and many of his Republican allies across the country. We can and we will continue to make sure the Capitol is safe from a security standpoint, but without addressing the root causes of the violence on January 6th, the insurrection will not be an aberration. It could well become the norm. And just like the Senate has the power to pass legislation supporting our Capitol Police force, we have the same power and obligation to pass legislation to address these root causes that brought the big lie to life. That is what my Senate Democratic colleagues and I are focused on and committed to doing here in the Rules Committee and among our caucus as a whole. And we must act. We must act. More than at any point in recent history, threats of political violence are on the rise. Election administrators, basically people who are almost like civil servants, just trying to count the elections accurately, are facing harassment, even death threats for carrying out their duty. Isn't that a sad day in this country? When the people who, in many situations, nonpartisan, in many situations, bipartisan, but are simply dedicated to counting the vote fairly, are threatened. Something is very wrong. By one measure, nearly a third of those who count the votes say they feel less safe on the job, and many, many, many of them are quitting because they fear for their safety. What has this country come to when that happens? When the wellspring of our democracy, the fair, unbiased counting of the votes, which has been part of our hallmark in this country since we've started, which is the root of democracy, when people who do that are threatened with violence, what has come of our country? So we must act. We must act. My colleagues, the threats that I have mentioned are the symptoms of an illness festering deep within the bones of our democracy. And unless we confront the big lie, unless all of us do our part to fortify and strengthen our democracy, the political violence of January 6th risks becoming little more than a taste of dangers to come. All of us have a role to play to protect our democratic system. Everyone, from our Capitol Police to the voting public, to those of us entrusted to serve in elected office. And again, just as the Capitol Police have taken the experience of January 6th to institute reforms for the future, Every member of the United States Senate is called on to do the same, to reckon with the lessons of that terrible day, and to take action to cure America of the disease of the big lie. That means passing legislation to protect our democracy from subversion and safeguard the right to vote, including the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. In the weeks to come, I look forward to working with all my colleagues to achieve this goal. For now, let me close again by thanking Chief Manger for being here and for leading his department in making the changes necessary to prepare for the future. And let me thank Senator Klobuchar, Senator Blunt, and the Rules Committee for their role. I know it's not easy work. I know at times it's been met with resistance, but I commend you, Captain, for keeping your eye on the big picture and for doing your part to protect our democracy. It is my hope the Senate can follow suit in the near future.
Thank you very much, Leader Schumer. Well said. I will now introduce our witness, Mr. Thomas Manger, the Chief of the United States Capitol Police. Chief Manger was sworn into his current position on July 21st, 2021. He joined the department following a distinguished 42-year career in law enforcement, most recently serving for 15 years as Chief of Police in Montgomery County, Maryland. During that time, he was also elected by his peers across the country to serve as the president of the Major City Chiefs Association. Earlier in his career, he served as Chief of Police in Fairfax County, Virginia, where he rose through the ranks after first joining the force following his graduation from the University of Maryland. I will now swear in our witness. Chief Manger, if you could please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before the committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. You can be seated. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairwoman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Blunt, distinguished members of the committee, thank you for providing me with the opportunity to speak about the significant improvements that we've made following the events of January 6th, and to speak about the work that remains to be done. I want to begin by acknowledging the men and women of the Capitol Police who work so tirelessly to fulfill their mission of protecting the U.S. Capitol, the members of Congress, and the legislative process every day. It's my honor to work with these women and men who performed so courageously a year ago. And while I'm proud of our officers, the events of January 6th did expose critical departmental failures and deficiencies with operational planning, intelligence, staffing, training, and equipment. I'm pleased to report that we have addressed a significant portion of the many recommendations issued to the department. In fact, of the more than 100 recommendations issued by the Inspector General, we have implemented and are addressing over 90 of them. The staff report issued by your committee listed 5 recommendations directed to the United States Capitol Police. I can tell you that the department has implemented or is in the process of implementing each one of them. I'm prepared to discuss many of the recommendations today, but understanding the time limitations, I'll focus on the improvements that are the most impactful and that address the core of the committee's findings and conclusions. I've provided under separate cover for inclusion in the official hearing record a more complete formal statement that includes a detailed list of all the department's post-January 6th improvements. The committee concluded that an important contributing factor to the breach of the Capitol was the lack of a department-wide operational plan for the joint session. An important first step we took to address that concern was the onboarding of a former Secret Service official with extensive experience in major event and national special security event planning. Guided by his expertise, we now take a multi-phased approach to our planning process, with a focus on information gathering, intelligence, asset determination, internal coordination, and most importantly, department-wide dissemination of all intelligence and critical information before all large and high-risk events. This also includes the creation of the department's first critical incident response plan, which now allows us to more effectively and more quickly obtain assistance from partner agencies. In short, a blueprint for operational planning has been created and put into place for all future significant events. If January 6th taught us anything, it's that preparation matters. Immediately after the 6th, the department focused on the need to strengthen our frontline officers, the Civil Disturbance Unit, or CDU. For any demonstration that involves violence or the potential for violence, the need for a well-trained and well-equipped CDU is crucial. Recognizing the tactical importance of our CDU officers, we've developed a plan to elevate their status and incentivize them to remain in the unit. The plan entails the creation of 8 hard platoons. These platoons will be permanent units whose members train together and are deployed together. We've done other things as well to strengthen the CDU and make it more effective. One such measure is the establishment of the Bicycle Response Team, which works in coordination with CDU. We can now deploy 100 trained and certified bike officers, as well as 8 trained and certified officials to complement the CDU operations. Of course, our first responders can't do their job without the proper equipment. Therefore, we've reviewed all CDU equipment and upgraded it extensively to protect our officers and enhance our ability for crowd control. Our improvements have touched every component of the U.S. Capitol Police Department, but few changes are as dramatic as the ones that we've made to the way we gather, analyze, share, use, and disseminate intelligence. However, improvements to the department's lead intelligence component, the Intelligence and Interagency Coordination Division, began before January 6th. The department recognized that the IICD's decentralized structure had created informational silos. The continued focus on this has yielded significant improvements, including a nationwide search for a permanent intelligence director. The department is in the final stages of that process. We should have somebody on board in the coming weeks. The development of a United States Capitol Police intelligence product that is now shared with the intelligence community, the issuance of a daily intelligence report distributed to all officers and officials within the department, a biweekly classified intelligence briefing, coordination with intelligence and law enforcement partners in advance of large or high-profile events, the realignment of task force officers to enhance intelligence sharing and dissemination, and the authorization for increased staffing. In fact, we've added 9 new intelligence analysts. We continue to be forward-looking in our efforts to ensure that the department has a strong and proven intelligence collection, analysis, and dissemination program. I want to thank the committee for its ongoing support during this process, in particular your support for the Capitol Police Emergency Act. I also acknowledge and appreciate the support that we have received from the Capitol Police Board. Today, I'm confident that the U.S. Capitol Police Department has made significant progress addressing the deficiencies that impacted the department's response on January 6th. And while more work remains to be done, the men and women of the Capitol Police stand ready to fulfill their mission each and every day.
Thank you very much, Chief. I want to start by asking, do you believe that the department would be better able to defend against the type of threat that we saw a year ago today than the department was back then?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. And we had a number of recommendations. I'm not going to go through them all, but I know, having reviewed your testimony, having our staff has spent significant time working with your leadership, and that you are making progress to implement the recommendations that are pertaining to the police department. Is that right?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. As you know, we had the Inspector General in, Senator Blunt and I had the Inspector General in about a month ago or so, and he also issued more than 100 recommendations, which we truly appreciated. And he talked about the progress that he knew of that you had made at the time. And we've, of course, after that hearing, as is our job, encouraged you to work with him and to report back on the progress. Can you tell me where you are in responding to this and the progress you've made on his recommendations?
Yes. So at the time when the Inspector General testified, I think we had about 30 of the 103 recommendations that were closed, that were implemented, that we had finished. At the time, we also had another 60 recommendations that were basically in progress, that we had a detailed plan in place, but the plan had not been completed. In some cases, the plan won't be completed until the FY23 budget is approved. So some of these, it's going to take time, but the plan's in place, the work is in progress. So we had basically addressed over 90 of the 103 recommendations. We still continue to work on those. We have since, I think, closed another 5 or 6 of the recommendations. We continue to work on all of them. And in fact, we have, I have assigned an inspector to work full-time for the next several months to look at the recommendations that are not completed and to see what we need to do to complete them.
Thank you. Thank you.
We've got a plan in place to address all of them.
And you understand, we are very laser focused here, Senator Blunt and myself and the rest of our committee, on that accountability, given what happened. And so we appreciate that. I'm sure we'll have the Inspector General back next year, and we'll continue this review. Our report found that 75% of the officers, 900 of 1,200, on duty on January 6th were forced to defend the Capitol in their regular uniforms. Many officers could not access riot shields because they were actually locked on a bus. The emergency funding legislation signed into law in July included significant new funding to improve Capitol Police officers' equipment, access to equipment. Do the officers now have better access to equipment they need to do their jobs? And this is something individual officers have spoken to me about as well.
So we have we've gotten shields for new shields because some of the ones that we'd had were past their expiration date. And we deploy those shields every day. In fact, I'm sure that as you walk around the campus, there's times when you pass through a door and you notice that there's a stack of shields behind the door. So we've got them deployed around the campus in case we need them. We've ordered all new equipment for our civil disturbance unit officers. That equipment, like many things, is impacted by the supply chain issues that are going on. We should have that. My hope is this month, but certainly in the coming weeks, we should have that equipment. That will be deployed. But I think the important part of your question is that any officer that would be deployed as a CDU officer now would have all their equipment. It might not be new equipment, but they will not come out there without everything they need. So we've got new equipment on order. We're going to it's upgraded. It's better. And we'll be deploying that as soon as it comes in, and again, hopefully in the next few weeks. But we will send no officer out to work CDU without all the equipment that they need.
Okay, and you mean civil disturbance unit there for people watching?
Correct.
For CDU. And no more locked buses where they can't access it. That was an unbelievable story, just horrific. They're looking at the equipment and they can't get it.
That would not happen again.
Okay. We all remember, as I noted in the opening, the haunting words of the officer, "Does anyone have a plan?" As you note, in recent months, the department has made clear progress with respect to operational planning. In your testimony, you called this game changer, the fact that you have this department-wide incident assessment plan. Can you briefly expand on what has been done to improve preparedness for large events? I know you noted you hired someone who has key experience with that. Anything else you want to add?
So we have an incident action plan prepared for tomorrow for the anniversary of January 6th. This is a copy of it. It's 25 pages long. In it, everybody's responsibilities are laid out. This information is shared with everyone so that a captain who's in charge of one division knows exactly what's going on in the other divisions as well as his or her own. So we are sharing information better. We are assigning responsibilities. People know what their responsibilities are, and we have backups to each one of the different commanders. So the blueprint that has been created we've used it many times since the 6th, and we're very confident that it gives us everything we need to ensure that the planning that we do, the sharing of information, and that everybody on the department understands what their responsibilities are.
As I noted, Senator Blunt and my legislation, which was importantly co-sponsored by many members of this committee, gave you and in general the Capitol Police Chief authority to request assistance from the National Guard in an emergency. It was cloudy at best before and very difficult procedure. How will this improve your ability to respond in potential future emergencies at the Capitol?
Well, clearly, it cuts through the red tape and allows the Capitol Police Chief to make that call directly. I have spoke with the Department of Defense, and in fact, am meeting with them later today, and to make sure that we have the process down, so that if the time ever came that we needed to make that call, everyone would know what the expectations are on both sides of the call. That is very helpful. But I will just say this, that my hope is that with the other processes planning that we've put into place, that there's not going to be the need for a panicked call in an emergency, that those things will be planned ahead of time so that we'll have better coordination in advance.
Okay. We all speak to officers in the Capitol, and if my colleagues, I know they do, and thank them every single day. And one of the things that we know is that many of them have had their vacations canceled. They have been working significant overtime. And I think sometimes that's by choice. And right now, we are down officers. And this was something that was happening all across the country, honestly. It's happening right now. But it's something that you are uniquely challenged to deal with. I know there's more than 400 officers short. Could you tell us your plans to change that?
I have short-term plans and longer-term strategies as well. I think the important long-term strategy is that we intend to hire over 280 police officers in this fiscal year. In a normal year, we would hire less than half of that. But because we want to get ahead of attrition that has increased over the last year, we're going to hire 280 officers this year. Our intent is to hire 280 police officers for the next 3 years. That will get us ahead of attrition, and my hope is that will get us to where we need to be in terms of staffing. Shorter-term strategies are to look at hiring, to reemploy annuitants, hiring or allowing for lateral transfers, lateral hires from other agencies, and then also looking at contract security officers that can assist at particular locations where we don't really need an armed Capitol Police officer. And we're hoping that that would free up officers to be held over less frequently, to be able to get their days off as they plan, and address some of the staffing issues that are really impacting the morale of this department.
Thank you. And your long-term plan, though, is to hire actual officers full-time?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Last thing, I mentioned the threats against Congress. Many people in this very room, committee members, have experienced them. Over 9,000 threats in 2021 alone. That's an astounding number against 500-some people. And I understand that you've hired these additional threat assessment agents. What steps are you taking to protect members of Congress and the people that work with them?
Our better coordinate. What we're trying to do is have better coordination. We can control and we can do a lot when members are on campus. When they go home, their home districts, we're trying to work with the local officers in those jurisdictions to ensure the safety and security of staff there, of offices there, and so we can provide advice and provide recommendations in terms of how to better secure locations, whether offices or homes, but we can also work more closely with the local law enforcement partners to solicit their help. The biggest challenge I think we have is keeping up with the number of threats. I mean, we've doubled the number of officers that investigate these threats, agents that investigate these threats, and if they continue to go up the way they have, clearly we're going to need additional officers to assign to this responsibility.
Okay. Thank you, Chief. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. Chief, on the issue of bringing in contract employees, Officer Papathanacio has suggested that the union rep, that this would be a problem for them. Do you want to talk about how you're going to deal with that? Obviously, in my view, a bigger problem for them is the overwork and the extended stress of being short so many officers. But tell me how you plan to work with the officers who are concerned about bringing in non-sworn officers to do even parts of this work?
So I've been in discussions with the union about this specific issue. They have mentioned a number of concerns, and our conversations and our intent is to try and address those concerns, because I think what we agree on is that these officers need some relief, that we need to allow these officers to get more time off, to stop being held over on their shifts, to stop being forced to work overtime when they would rather be home with their families. So again, I've talked about the strategies that we have in place, but the contract security would be a temporary solution until we can get more officers hired. And my intent is to try and address the concerns that the union has with regard to where these contract security officers are assigned.
And for that program to really work, what kind of temporary program would it be? Would you anticipate a multi-year bid or a one-year bid with possible extensions, or what are you thinking about as you begin to think about how you look for these contract employees?
So look, realistically, I think it's going to take us at least 2 to 3 years to get up to our staffing in terms of hiring new officers. So having that as an option to use over the next 2 or 3 years, I would like to have that option.
Just to be sure we're straight on this, hiring the officers to get to the officers you currently are allowed to have is the problem here, as opposed to the Congress saying, we're going to give you 100 more officers than you're currently capped at. That's an unrealistic moment for us to think about. Your goal is to fill the slots that you already have been allowed to have, and you're 400 short. Are you 400 short right now
Yes,
of
sir.
meeting that number?
Yeah, actually 457 short.
457?
Yes, sir.
If I understood your thought also of hiring 280 new officers a year for the next 3 years, understanding that other officers will retire and find other opportunities, and that number sounds about right to me to get up to where you need to be. How long is the training process from the time you bring an officer into the training environment until you have them available for service?
From the time they're hired to the time you can actually deploy them by themselves is close to a year.
Close to a year. So hiring people, annuitants who have retired but are willing to come back to work is one of your thoughts?
That's correct, because you'd be hiring back someone who has that experience, and they could go back to work day one.
And when you hire laterally, would you just try to evaluate the level of training that officer already has, and then determine what additional training is necessary before you put them into the line?
Exactly, yes.
All right. I think every police force in America, certainly every big police force in America, has a lot of that same challenge of just people leaving either the big force for a smaller force in some other community, or leaving with frustration this whole idea that somehow defunding the police was ever any real option for the country. The Inspector General's testified before us that he thinks that, in his view, restructuring to where the U.S. Capitol Police was more of a protective agency instead of a law enforcement agency. I'm not absolutely sure I know what he means by that, but why don't you give us your sense of what, after 6 months on the job, what's your vision of what the Capitol Police Force would look like 2 years from now and 5 years from now, and maybe even longer, if you've thought through the way that this force should function to best do its job?
Well, thank you for asking that question. I think that where I agree with the Inspector General is the fact that we need to expand and enhance our ability to investigate threats against Congress, to provide protection to members against Congress, to our counter-surveillance activities, to enhance security in the home districts, as I've mentioned, and So in that regard, we need to expand our protection capabilities. But we make no mistake, we continue to have to be a police department as well. The difference between the U.S. Capitol and the White House or the CIA or other facilities is that we are open to the public. Someone can walk in off the street, now not now because of COVID, but someone could walk in off the sidewalk, come through the doors and say, I just like to look around. I want to walk around. So we deal with the public every day. We deal with demonstrations every day. We have to respond to crimes most days. We are handling demonstrations. We're making arrests. We're staffing posts. We do crowd control, visitor control, employee screening, crime prevention, response to calls for service, crisis negotiations, all of which are part of being a police department. So while I agree that we need to expand our protection capabilities, I don't think that we can walk too far away from our police responsibilities as well, because they will remain. So in answer to your question about where I think we need to go, one of the ways that I believe that we need to expand our protection capabilities is to take the work that we do in terms of investigating threats, take our intelligence responsibilities, and make those investigatory and intelligence responsibilities and create a new bureau, and have a new assistant chief, an additional assistant chief. So you'd have, I think our dignitary protection and protection responsibilities have grown. That continues to grow. The need there, the workload has increased. Uniformed services will always likely be the largest bureau that we have, but looking at intelligence and investigations and creating a new bureau with its own assistant chief, I believe, is the direction that we need to go. This then speaks directly to the IG's recommendation that to move toward more of a protection focus, because that's what this would allow the department to do.
Thank you. I'll have more questions later if we have time for a second round. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Senator Blunt. Next up virtually is Senator Warner, who is the chair of the Intelligence Committee, also has played a very important role in our responses since January 6th and before then to other threats to our Capitol and our democracy. Thank you, Senator Warner.
Well, thank you, Chair Klobuchar. And first of all, let me echo what I said in our last hearing. I want to thank you and Ranking Member Blunt for the way that you've conducted both the initial investigation and how the Rules Committee has really stepped up in terms of the assessment of making sure we protect the Capitol and on an ongoing basis. So thank both of you. I also want to highlight to Chief Major, at least to see you remotely. We had the opportunity to work together when I was governor and you were chief in Fairfax, and people still talk about your praises. We went through, as you may recall, those challenging 3 weeks plus of the sniper incidents that terrorized, frankly, the whole region. But I know you are the right person at this critical moment in terms of the evolution and direction of the Capitol Police. I want to pick up as Chair Klobuchar just indicated, and Senator Blunt's line of questioning about the structure. I know you're about to name this new deputy chief who will take on that role of intelligence. Could you expand that a little bit? When do you expect to name that individual? And also talk to us about, the intelligence functions of the Capitol Police. Will they be mostly receiving intelligence from other entities rather than doing your own intelligence work? Will you pursue, if there is indication of some kind of organized threat, will you pursue that versus FBI? Talk me through a little bit more of the role and structure of this intelligence unit.
Yes, sir. First, we have, you may be aware that we did have a civilian director of intelligence on January 6th. That person left in the weeks following the 6th. So we've been doing a nationwide search. We're going to make a final selection in the next couple of weeks, and my hope is that we have someone in place shortly thereafter. We have a very competent acting director in place now. I think the changes that we've made in the way we gather, share, disseminate intelligence, there's been a lot of changes, but the big thing is how we use intelligence. One of the problems, of course, on the 6th was that we had information and it wasn't acted upon. And intelligence is the only use that real intelligence is if it's actionable and it can actually help you formulate your plan in terms of how you're going to deal with a situation. So we have now, which we did not have on the 6th, we have our own intelligence analysts. We put 9 new ones in place in the last few months that have the same training as an FBI analyst, as a Homeland Security analyst. So we're speaking their language, we're sharing information, we've got people embedded in the FBI, embedded with DHS, and we've got our task force officers on different task forces with the FBI. So we're actually now plugged in to all the places we need to be plugged into, but we are also doing, while we are still sharing information and getting information from Homeland Security and FBI, we're not just totally dependent on them anymore. We have our own folks that are also doing research and doing our own analysis. So basically, we're staying connected to our partners in the federal intelligence community, but we're not just passive recipients anymore. We are active in the intelligence community, and we're active in terms of sharing our information and making sure that all the information that we get gets down to our folks, both the officials and the officers.
But Chief, that means you are, but the investigatory role is not something that Capitol Police is going to take on. That will still be reliant upon the FBI or DHS or other partners, right? So you may have the analysts, if there's an active plot, that the pursuit of those plotters, though, would be the FBI, not the Capitol Police. Is that correct?
For the most part, but I would say this, that when we get information about threats against Congress, that's a priority for us. And so we will take those cases and we'll run with them. Occasionally the FBI helps us with those cases. Occasionally Homeland Security helps us with those cases. But they have to prioritize things too. Our priorities are always the ones that are threats against Congress. So in some regard, we in fact are taking the lead role on some of these cases if they have to do with threats against Congress.
One last question. I know my time's expiring, but one of the things, I think we've gotten better, but we still have room to grow in terms of the intelligence community's willingness to share information on a regular basis. My hope, and can you speak to this for a moment, do you have interoperable systems so that you don't have to be reliant upon an agency, a partner to kind of brief you in person versus at least having some of your agents, analysts at a clearance level enough that they can real time get that intelligence that may be being looked at from the FBI or again some other agency that may even have a broader reach?
Yes, we do. I mean, we have daily intelligence briefings with our partners around the region. And as I mentioned, we are plugged into the FBI. We remain plugged into Homeland Security. We remain partners with everything the MPD is doing and Washington, D.C.'s Homeland Security. So we are absolutely connected and are speaking the same language and sharing information on a daily basis with all those partners.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Leahy.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. And I want to thank you and Chair Klobuchar for the bipartisan way in which you've held what's really a very important series of hearings about the violent insurrection of January 6th. And you know, I have enjoyed all these years of working with both of you. Chief, I'm glad to see you here, and I've enjoyed our conversations we've had. I think back, I'm beginning my 48th year here in the Senate, but I look at January 6th of last year. I never thought I'd see a day like that. A violent mob driven by the rhetoric and the lies of a disgraceful former president of the United States. They attacked our seat of government. They threatened not just the lives of the senators who are here in this room, but of congressional staff, of Capitol Hill reporters. And Chief Manger, you know so well the dedicated law enforcement officers who are sworn to protect the Capitol and the people who work here and what they faced. Because I have served here so long, I've gotten to know most of these officers over the years, dedicated, hardworking people, both in uniform and in plainclothes. In fact, one of the officers who died, I first knew him as a teenager. You know, this hits home. This is the Capitol family here. And hundreds of these heroes help protect the Capitol, still walk the grounds today. They're vigilant in upholding their oath to protect and serve. I certainly see it as President Pro Tem of the Senate, and those who protect that office. But some are no longer walking here. Those officers of the Capitol Police and the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police who gave their lives protecting our lives, they can't be out of our thoughts or our prayers. Their sacrifices shouldn't be papered over by those who want to pretend nothing happened. Now, Chief, you came out of retirement to take on an immensely important job at really an unenviable time, and I praise you for doing that. I know that you sit before us as a representative of the force you lead, and it's a force that's struggling today with morale and with memories and with shortages. You spoke as recently as this weekend about the staffing shortages facing the Capitol Police. Last year, the Senate Appropriations Committee released a legislative branch bill for fiscal year 2022 to provide $90 million more. That's pending, and I hope we can finally get these appropriations bills forward. Senator Blunt has been very helpful on the Republican side in the Appropriations Committee and strongly supported the extra $100 million that we put in the last bill. But if Congress fails to reach an agreement to pass the FY22 spending bills, if you're held to last year's spending levels, how would this lack of increased funding impact the Capitol Police ability to protect the Capitol?
Senator, it would impact just about everything that we're trying to do in terms of making and sustaining improvements, especially in the areas of intelligence, threat analysis, dignitary protection, and security infrastructure. We'd have to suspend our health and wellness initiatives that we've started. But I think the biggest impact would be our inability to increase our staffing, which is so critical. All we would be able to do is just replace the people that left. We can't survive and continue. We have to increase our staffing, as I talked about before, but that would be the biggest impact.
Well, I commend both those Republicans and Democrats who joined with me last year to get the extra money for the Capitol Police, and I hope that we can all come together, both parties, to get our appropriations bills through this year so that you will have the additional funding that we've put in there. And tell me how you used some of these additional resources, which would, of course, disappear if we get stuck with a continuing resolution.
So first, the retention bonus that we were able to provide officers, I think is going to really have a great benefit. Over 90% of our department signed an agreement to stay for another year minimum for another year. This will definitely slow down the attrition in the upcoming year, so it'll allow us, hopefully, as we hire more. So the retention bonus was one of the ways that we will, I think we're able to use that to help with our staffing issues. The hazard pay, anybody that was here on January 6th got hazard pay. We got the new CDU equipment. Cell phones for every police officer. One of the big issues was officers were not getting intelligence information. They get intelligence briefings every day on their cell phones and operational information every day on their cell phones. There are training initiatives that we want to get to, replacing and replenishing equipment that was deployed on the 6th. We've been able to do that as well. So that money's gone to good use and has really put us in a much better position than we were in.
Well, I thank you, Chief. Chair, I thank you. And in a few minutes, I'll open the Senate for the day in my capacity as President Pro Tem. But then I'm also going to be speaking to a lot of senators this week in both parties. Let's get these funding bills through. Certainly, you're an example of a department that needs them. Chair, thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Leahy. And again, we all appreciate you and Senator Shelby's work to make sure that this chief and his officers have the resources that they need. Thank you so much. Next up, someone who's been incredibly active on this committee. We appreciate his work, Senator Merkley of Oregon. He's here virtually.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you, Chief Manager, for your leadership and efforts to implement the recommendations of the Rules Committee and of the Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee, as well as recommendations from the Inspector General's office to enhance security of our Capitol complex. I want to directly thank the men and women of the Capitol Police Force for their heroism on January 6th and their service and resiliency in the aftermath of that very dark hour. We've made a lot of progress in this past year, as this hearing is highlighting, and there's challenges to come that are also part of this hearing. And I wanted to just touch on a couple of those. First, I wanted to be clear about the number of officers who are currently on the force. You had mentioned the numbers were short, but how many officers are on the force currently?
I'm going to have to get back to you with that number. But here's what I can tell you, though. Over the past year, 153 officers either retired or resigned from the department. We have 175. On any given day, we have 175 officers that are on some type of leave. Many of those are out due to COVID. And so basically, we are 400 and I may have said 457. It's 447, Senator, short where we need to be. So I would think that we're somewhere around 1,700 that we have between 1,600 and 1,700 we can actually deploy at a post or assign to a responsibility.
Thank you. That really puts that into context. Then both the shortage. And also your desire to hire, I believe you proposed hire an additional 280 officers this coming year. And do you see, apart from the issue of funding, assuming there's adequate funding, is that a feasible objective to achieve?
I believe it is. It'll be a challenge. There's no question. I mean, hiring that many officers, the real challenge is to make sure that you hire the right officers, that we're hiring good quality candidates. We have a plan in place to get them trained, and because that's been the choke point in the past is actually getting them through the training and the national or the federal law enforcement training center. We've got a plan to get all the officers through training. And I think some positive news is that so far we've not had difficulty in recruiting people. We're getting plenty of people who are showing interest in wanting to be a part of our organization. We're still very selective about who we end up hiring. But I do believe it's realistic, and we're going to do everything we can and we've got a plan in place to get 280 folks on board.
Great, great. No, I'm glad to hear that. The Inspector General, Mr. Bolton, made the recommendation that all the members should obtain and maintain a security clearance. You mentioned that intelligence is coming through to the officers on a daily basis. I know that may not necessarily mean security clearance rated intelligence, but is that part, do you feel like that is a recommendation that should be fulfilled, that each person obtain a security clearance? And if so, do we need to have some sort of way to prioritize those security clearances, given that the security clearance process is completely backlogged right now?
So the answer to the second part of your question is absolutely yes. We would have to have some method to get those done. And this is really where it comes down. I believe that it certainly has, that recommendation has merit, but I am concerned about the fact that I'm trying to hire 280 officers. If that security clearance process slows the hiring process down, that's a concern to me. I do know that we already have many of our personnel that have security clearances. And certainly I can look at assignments and say, yes, someone in a particular assignment would need a security clearance. But I also think that as we hire new officers, not every single officer in every assignment would actually need a security clearance. So while I think long-term, I think we can look at that. In the short term, I'm concerned about it holding up the hiring process and do we really, actually focusing on where we need the officers that actually would require a security clearance?
Well, no, I absolutely agree. It shouldn't be a requirement to get folks on board, but as you get them on board and you feel they need those clearances, please raise to us the need to be able to clear the path so that those who need those clearances can get them to fulfill the full range of their potential contributions to the force. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Merkley and Chief. Next up, a very constructive member of this committee as well, Senator Capito. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the Chief on behalf of a grateful recipient of the service that you and the U.S. Capitol Police provide on this campus and in our districts and many times to look at the security of our own offices and our own homes. And sometimes I want to express our deep appreciation and gratitude. So thank you, and I hope you'll pass that along. I read through your statement, and I read a news clip, I guess, this morning, talking about the scars that are remaining from the Capitol Police from the January 6th incident, terrible incident. How is the morale? I mean, how many of your officers have actually asked for additional mental health? Do you feel you have the capacities for that? I know you've increased that. Where is your level of concern right now, a year later?
One of the priorities we had was to make sure we had programs in place to deal with not only just the daily stress of the job, but folks that were actually who have gone through traumatic incidents, who experienced that trauma. So we have instituted a robust peer support program. We're in the process of hiring. I think we've already actually hired a couple trauma counselors. We've got formal programs in place now so that officers can seek that help. I can't tell you how many have sought that help because it's confidential, and because when they...
I was just looking for a general ballpark.
Yeah, well,
is there a great take-up of this? Or
I think that a fair number of officers have have availed themselves to these services, and I think as they hear from other officers how much these programs have helped, it may encourage more officers to seek that help as well. I'm glad you asked about the morale issue. Morale, for someone who's been a cop for over 42 years, morale is always, what I've learned is it's in the eye of the beholder. You're always going to have cops that will tell you, oh, morale's the worst it's ever been. But you have other cops that every day they show up, no matter what happens, they're happy to be there and love their job. So it's really, but what it comes down to is, and I think for us, is these officers need to believe in their hearts that this department cares about them, that what happened on January 6th, where the department let them down in so many ways, that the department will take responsibility for fixing those failures and for making sure that that never happens again. And that's going to take time. For some officers, they've seen some of the improvements, and I think that they appreciate it. But for other officers, perhaps a little more cynical, perhaps they're going to wait till the first time we're tested again. And are we ready for that test? And so it's one of my responsibilities to make sure we restore that confidence, for the officers in the department.
Let me ask you this. A lot of, in the retrospective that we've done in this committee and other committees, there were, on the intelligence side, questions as to was social media paid enough attention to, in the run-up to January the 6th. What adjustments have you made in terms of the coordination between you and other agencies in terms of the social media monitoring?
So this is one of the areas where we are taking more responsibility, and we can focus on. And we're not trying to worry about something that's going on in a foreign country. What we're worried about and what we're paying attention to is threats against Congress and threats against the Capitol. That is our focus. And so while you have other intelligence community folks that are looking at anything and everything, we've got folks in place now that are paying attention to those kinds of threats, those statements that cause concern. So we've got folks that not only are looking at that are watching for that, but we are also then ensuring that if it crosses that line in terms of being a crime, what someone says in social media, that we follow up on that with an investigation.
Is that different? I mean, has that changed over the last year? That's a new addition.
Yes, we've got more people that are doing that.
Yeah, good.
Well, I think before the 6th, I'm not sure we had anybody doing it, but we've got, I think, 8 or 9 people in place now that are doing that, with more on the horizon. Our biggest challenge right now is keeping up with the caseload in terms of the threats against Congress, the ones that cross that line where we do have to do a criminal investigation.
Well, thank you again. And I know I did want to ask about, I know you've been asked about the 400 openings that you've talked about and the recruitment. And, I know that there probably law enforcement in general, I don't know what the female ratio is, but I'm sure it's quite low. So I noticed that too in the Capitol Police. So I'm hoping that you're making special efforts to diversify the workforce as you've got this opportunity to hire more people. It's a great career, and I'm certainly grateful, as I stated. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Capito. Next up, Senator King, who brings his strong sense of independence to this committee, and we appreciate him as well. Senator King. I'm going to give Senator King a minute here.
There he
I'm
is. Sorry. Am I? Yeah, now I'm unmuted.
There you go. Good. You're all good.
Okay, thank you. Chief, I hope you will convey our appreciation to the men and women of the Capitol Police. Whenever I'm interacting, my sort of standard comment is thanks for looking after us, and that we really do appreciate it. And in the day-to-day of politics, it's hard sometimes for people to realize that. So please convey the deep appreciation and thanks from all of us, that we care about what they do, and we appreciate what they do for us. Couple of things. You touched on the issue of security clearances, and that's a problem throughout the federal government, although I must say it's better now than it was 2 or 3 years ago. One of the questions that has been plagued us is reciprocity. Do you have a situation where somebody has a security clearance from another federal agency, but then when they come to apply to you, they have to start all over again? Or do you have a reciprocity arrangement where if they're cleared for state or the FBI, they're also cleared for the Capitol Police?
If it's done by either the Department of Defense or the FBI, typically if it's done by any federal agency, I would think that would suffice for us.
Okay, well, I would urge you to look into that because it doesn't make much sense, but believe it or not, there are plenty of places where that reciprocity isn't honored and it really delays the process. And as you say, you can have a good recruit, but they get discouraged by the length of the security clearance process and go on and find another opportunity. And in this economy, we can't afford to lose good people. A couple of other questions and observations. In terms of your planning, it seems to me that one of the things that we've learned on January 6th is there was a lack of pre-planning. In other words, a lack of imagination. We have to have people that are thinking the unthinkable and saying, okay, what happens if? What do we do? So I hope that's the case. And my question is, do you feel that we have adequate communication and coordination with other agencies that might be important, either from an intelligence point of view, such as the FBI or the other intelligence agencies, or with law enforcement, DC, Metropolitan Police, the National Guard? Are we working on pre-existing coordination and communication plans so that we don't have to make it up on the fly in the case of an emergency?
The answer to that question is yes, we are. And in fact, it has become a part of our the blueprint that we use in terms of our pre-planning for these events to reach out to those partner agencies to ensure that we're sharing information, that if we we believe that we're going to need their help, that we plan for that well ahead of time so that we're able to do, and we end up doing tabletop exercises. We end up getting the commanders over here to show them exactly where we need their folks deployed and what responsibilities that we're going to give to them. So absolutely, that's part of our planning process now.
And I hope that extends to the intelligence side as well. You mentioned you're developing some of your own intelligence capability, but we have, as you know, enormous intelligence capabilities throughout the federal government. My concern is we still tend to have silos. They're excellent silos, but they're still silos. And I hope that the coordination includes pre-event intelligence.
It does, and we, one of the problems that we identified shortly after the 6th was the fact that we, even internally, we had intelligence silos within our organization. Those are gone, and we, with the briefings that we have with our partners multiple times a week, any silos that existed previously certainly do not now.
Final question, and I remember we discussed this, not you and I, but this was discussed in a prior hearing, and that is work with the architect of the Capitol in terms of the physical infrastructure and the ability to seal the building effectively. And again, we're back to silos. I hope that there's a close relationship between your department and the architect of the Capitol, because your people's job could be a lot easier if we had Lexan windows and metal doors that could easily be closed in the case of an emergency.
One of the things that the architect has done is to make sure he's hearing everybody's voice. He's brought experts in to do reviews and provide recommendations, but he's also ensured that everybody has been able to lend their voice to their concerns about physical security. So I think that that's all been part of his planning process.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Chief, and thanks again to all of your people for the great work that they do on our behalf. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator King. And next up, Senator Cruz. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief, welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you for your service. And I want to start by thanking the heroic service of the men and women who serve alongside you. We are approaching a solemn anniversary this week, and it is an anniversary of a violent terrorist attack on the Capitol, where we saw the men and women of law enforcement demonstrate incredible courage, incredible bravery, risk their lives to defend the men and women who serve in this Capitol. We are grateful for that courage. We appreciate the selfless sacrifice of the men and women who keep us safe. And I will say, my view is that anyone who commits an act of violence should be prosecuted. And anyone who assaults a law enforcement officer should go to jail for a very long time. And I think that's a principle that is true regardless of the politics of the violent criminal, whether they are right-wing, left-wing, or they got no wings at all. If you assault a cop, you ought to go to jail for a long, long time. And I hope we get some agreement that that should be true regardless of the political context that ostensibly and purportedly justifies that violence, that we will stand with the men and women of blue. So I thank you for your service. I thank the men and women who serve with you for their service.
Thank you.
As we reflect on what happened a year ago, it is also worth asking, as we have, as this committee has, as Congress has, as I know you have, what could have been done differently? What could have prevented the breach of the Capitol? What could have prevented the riot getting as far as it did? And so let me just start with that question. With the benefit of hindsight, what could have been done to better secure the Capitol, to stop the riot outside and prevent them from penetrating as far as they did?
So I think that clearly documented intelligence failures. There were leadership failures within the Capitol Police Department. If folks had, if the intelligence had been acted on the way it should have been, and we would have had enough people here, I think it would have been a different story. And that one of the things that we have, one of the changes that we put into place is that with a few phone calls, I can get double or triple the number of police officers we have, trained, equipped police officers here to assist us in our responsibilities to protect the Capitol and protect the members of Congress. So, you know, and we will be tested again, Senator. I mean, and I don't know who it's going to be or when it's going to be, but we will likely be tested again. But what will be different is that we will be paying much more attention to the information that we gather ahead of time. We will be putting together a better plan. We will be getting the help that we need pre-planned here on campus before we need it, not making panicked calls later on. And I say that not in any way criticize the folks that were here on the 6th. They had a very difficult challenge. And I frankly have not been looking behind me. I'm looking forward about what we need to do to make the changes. But clearly, when you look at the recommendations, when you look at what happened, we didn't have the people, we didn't act on the intelligence, and we just weren't prepared the way we should have been. And that's going to change. That has changed, and the next time that we're tested, we will not be making those same mistakes.
Well, and let me say one of the things we've seen the last 2 years is a dramatic increase in threats directed at lawmakers. And those threats are bipartisan. They're directed at Republicans and Democrats. The Chairwoman and I have discussed this at length. And let me say the Capitol Police does a tremendous job working to deal with those threats and working to keep us safe. We are grateful for that. The two areas you identified for improvement were intelligence gathering and manpower. On the manpower side, you talked about the ability to surge additional resources. What are the sources of those additional officers to surge on the manpower side? And then let me ask secondly, on the intelligence side, what more do we need to do on the front end to anticipate the specific threats that we need to be ready for?
So in terms of surging staffing here, we've got federal partners, we've got state and local partners, we've got the National Guard, all of whom we have coordinated with since the 6th, all of whom we have sat down and said, okay, when we need help, here's how we're going to do it. One of the things, and I thank the both the Senate and the House for passing the supplemental. We have included in there was funding so that if we asked for state and local help, and at one point for one event we had an additional 400, 500 police officers, trained civil disturbance unit police officers here to enhance our capability. We were able to offset the expenses from those partners so that when we make the request, we're going to get a yes. Metropolitan Police Department and Chief Conte we couldn't find a better partner than MPD. I speak with the chief fairly frequently. And anything that we need is, again, the answer is yes from MPD. But we know we need to talk ahead of time to plan for these things, which takes to your second question about the intelligence and what we're doing on the front end. We did not, prior to the 6th, we were not sharing information the way we should be, and we were not disseminating it to our own people the way we should be. And intelligence is only useful if you act on it. When you get intelligence, you need to say, okay, how does this impact our operational plan? What are we going to do? We've heard this, we have this intelligence, we believe it's credible. What are we going to do about it? So those are changes that we have made and put into place so that we are sharing it, we're acting on it, we're using it, and we're disseminating it to our own officers. So we're going to get tested again, but we have put things into place to make sure that we will not be impacted by intelligence failures or failure to plan ahead, failure to imagine, or failure to have enough people here. Those are things that we've put into place that I'm confident that when we're tested again, we're going to be fine.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you very much, Senator Cruz. Thanks for the focus on member security, and we'll continue to work together on that. Next up is Senator Padilla, such a leader on voting rights on this committee with his past work as Secretary of State for the state of California. Thank you, Senator Padilla, for being on today.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Before I get to a couple questions that I want to prioritize, I want to take the opportunity to comment on something that Senator Cruz just raised. I mean, I appreciate the fact that he recognized last January 6th, I believe he called it a riot and referenced rioters. I believe it was an insurrection personally. We can discuss and debate what the proper terminology is, but even if it was just a riot, we saw the result of that incident. We saw violent attempts to disrupt Congress, to disrupt the process of certifying the election results, and in it's part of the greater peaceful transfer of power. We saw violence. It was deadly violence. We saw attacks and assaults far beyond insults and disrespect towards Capitol police officers. So if we're in agreement on a bipartisan basis to recognize January 6th for what it was, then we should also agree on a bipartisan basis to ask some questions. Was it organic and spontaneous, or was it organized and premeditated? If it was organized and premeditated, you're going to have a hard time convincing me otherwise. Then we have to ask the questions: who was behind it? Who organized? Who incited this? We had the opportunity to set up an independent bipartisan commission to answer those very questions, but unfortunately, our Republican colleagues would not vote to do so. And so now I and so many people across the country eagerly await the result of the committee that was established in the House, a bipartisan committee which seeks to answer some of these questions. But let me now transition back to the topic at hand, the issues at hand, and some of the questions that I was hoping to raise. First, in the context of disinformation, Chief, I thank you for your service at this time of this agency and for your more than 40 years of work in law enforcement. The topic of disinformation has been raised by some of my colleagues already in this committee. I will not repeat them, but I do want to highlight one specific question. The role of disinformation in the lead up to January 6th is one thing, but what has been done since last year's insurrection is another. And I'm referring to the former president of the United States and his political allies seeking to whitewash, in fact, what happened. Some quoted publicly claiming that those who attacked the Capitol were just, quote, peaceful protesters, end quote. Perhaps nobody knows just how false those claims are than the women and men of the U.S. Capitol Police, who were beaten and bloodied, defending the people inside this building, and yes, defending democracy itself. So, Chief, what do you say to those who continue to perpetuate the lie that last January 6th just wasn't that, just wasn't that bad? What do you say to them?
So we are not concerned about political ideology. We're concerned about behavior. We're concerned about people that break the law. And people break the law. There are extremists on both sides of the spectrum that are breaking the law. And we're here to protect the Capitol, protect the members of Congress. That's our mission. And I would say to anybody that wants to come to this Capitol and peacefully demonstrate, we will protect your right to do so. But anybody that comes here and decides they want to break the law, that we're going to do everything in our power to stop you and to ensure that that the Capitol and the members of Congress remain safe.
Chief, I didn't think I need a follow-up question to that, but apparently I do. Do you think what we saw in the Capitol last January 6th was just another day, just people exercising their constitutional rights, or was it unacceptable, fatal violence?
As I watched the events of January 6th, I was at the time retired. I was at the time watching it on TV, and I was horrified by what I saw. I saw police officers being assaulted, and that's the reason that I'm sitting here today, is because I wanted to do what I could to help this police department and to better protect our nation and the Capitol and what this Capitol represents.
Thank you for that. Clearly, we have some
Okay.
ongoing work to do. One other quick question, Madam Chair. I know my time is up. I want to recognize that Senator Capito raised the concern and the questions about the mental health of the women and men of the U.S. Capitol Police. I share in that and stand by ready to support any additional resources or support that we can offer. I do have one question about physical health. We know that businesses, organizations, entities, both public and private across the country, have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic, whether it's individuals who are not willing to work because they have not been vaccinated, or people who are not able to work because they've contracted COVID-19. Chief, can you talk about vaccination levels within the department and what steps we're doing to encourage vaccination rates for those who aren't vaccinated yet?
So we are, I think we're over 70% of our employees are vaccinated. But like every agency that we just had a call of law enforcement agencies around the region yesterday, we're being hit hard by folks, both vaccinated and not vaccinated, with this latest variant that are testing positive. And we've got dozens of officers that are out on isolation. We've got dozens of officers that have been out long-term with the impacts of COVID. So it has affected our staffing levels. And again, with everything else all the other staffing challenges that we have, COVID is wreaking havoc as well.
Well, thank you for your responses, Chief, and thank you for your service. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Very good. Thank you, Senator Padilla. Senator Blunt, you have a few more questions. Thank you.
I do have, Chair. Thank you for the time to ask a few more questions. Chief, there have been some concerns expressed about individuals in senior leadership jobs in the department. You've been there 6 months. What are you doing to address those concerns among the officers themselves?
So, right after the 6th, the chief of police resigned. Both sergeant of arms in the day or two after the 6th were gone. In the weeks after that, there were our director of intelligence left. We had an assistant chief retire. We had two deputy chiefs retire. We had our director of security services. The two high-ranking civilian directors in our agency, intelligence and security services, left. So when I got here, if you look at the top level of our organization and the top 11 people, sworn and civilian, in our organization, 6 were gone. I had less than half of the leadership positions with the folks that were here on the 6th. And so as soon as I got here, my first order of business was to assess my leadership team and assess and look at who was here just biding their time, waiting to see what happens, and who was here working as hard as I was going to work in improving, making the improvements this agency required. And for the past 6 months, I've made that assessment. And I made that assessment, in light of discussions with the sergeant of arms, in light of discussions with past Capitol Police chiefs. I've made it in light of the no confidence votes that the union held, and I considered all that information. But what the bottom line, when I assess someone's performance, I look at what have they done since the 6th? What have they done to help this agency, to improve this agency? And so I've made those assessments. And I know that part of my leadership team that is working as hard as I am to make the changes that need to be made. And I know that there are still a lot of people that have differing opinions. I still understand that the union stands by its vote of no confidence. But the fact of the matter is, Senator, that a vote of no confidence is not an objective evaluation of someone's performance. It has meaning. A vote of no confidence has meaning. But I am trying to evaluate people's performance objectively in terms of what they're doing to help this organization. And so as I move forward, I do think I need to add an assistant chief to my leadership team, because for all reasons I talked about, that move toward being a more protective agency. And so as I make my decisions about where we're going to be in 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years, I'm now at a point where I'm ready to talk more publicly about what we need, come to the oversight committees, go to the Capitol Police Board about changes that organizational changes that need to be made. Because I can't make an organizational change without approval from the Capitol Police Board and this oversight committee. And so the time is now to have those discussions, to talk about the bigger plan, and understanding that not everybody's going to agree with my assessment, not everybody's going to agree with the direction that I may want to go. But I'm the one responsible for this department, and I'm the one responsible for the safety and security of this campus. And so the decisions I make are not, I had no predisposed notion about anybody. I made these decisions based on the last 6 months and my assessment of my leadership team and my assessment of the department and where we need to go to be in a better position to fulfill our mission.
Well, thanks, Chief. I think that's, I'm very supportive of, one, understanding all the vacancies you already had when you came to the job, and two, taking that time to evaluate not only who you had, but what you needed I think I can speak for the chairman of the committee, and certainly I can for myself, and we're looking forward to working with you as you come up with any reorganizational structure that, as you pointed out, this committee would have to approve. But after decades of work as a chief of police, and after now you're beginning to get in the second 6 months of your work here, beginning to make some of those permanent decisions, I think is important, and we look forward to working with you on those. I think my last question would be, of the unresolved recommendations from the IG or from the 5 big recommendations we made in our June report, which do you think are the most important to try to resolve as quickly as you can?
The intelligence recommendations, the operational planning recommendations, and making sure that we've got the CDU situation squared away. Those were the top 3, I think, priorities.
Good. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Just have 1 or 2 more questions here, and then we'll let you go back to your work, Chief. And I want to thank you for being here today. The first question I have is a pretty straightforward one about training. It's one of the things that we identified as an issue. The Inspector General in his reports identified the need for consistent training. And I've had individual officers actually in the last year talk to me about that, what kind of training they'd had leading into this. And some of that includes officers not receiving civil disturbance unit, as we say, CDU training, since they left the academy. Also, the Inspector General raised concerns about maintaining up-to-date certifications for specialized roles such as intelligence analysts, canine officers, and others. How has the department improved access to and prioritization of training? And what are your top priorities for expanding training?
So with the specific issues that were brought up in the recommendation from this committee's report, those have been squared away. We've made sure that we've got those certifications in place, and we've got a process in place to make sure that that's sustained. I could tell you that I have so many training priorities. I mean, during my 6 months here and the assessment I've done, I think, oh, we need to start doing more of this, more training here, more training there. The biggest challenge I have is the staffing problem. You can't do training if you're so short of staffing that you can't pull people off a post to send them to training.
Because you not only have the trainers, of course, but then you are pulling people off the front lines to have them trained, and so it's kind of a chicken and egg. You need to get these people in place.
But here's what we've done. We've got we just are getting 4, and they're called Virtua machines. It's basically a virtual training program. We're going to put a Virtua machine in headquarters. We're going to put one in the Capitol. We're going to put We're going to deploy a couple other of these machines. We are going to be able to. We won't have to pull an officer off a post all day. We can pull them off for a half hour and say, go through this training program, whether it's de-escalation, whether it's use of force, whether it's these virtual training implements are great for a number of areas.
And sometimes it's better to do training for a shorter period of time anyway, instead of sitting there all day.
And you can do it without impacting staffing. So we've got, one of the things I also want to do is focus more on leadership training. I don't think that this department, like many departments, does enough leadership training, and I'm talking about leadership for first-line supervisors as well as for commanders. And I want to make sure that we develop the leaders in this organization so that whenever I do leave, that the Sergeant of Arms, the oversight committees can look at it and say, you know what, we've got 3 or 4, 5 people within that organization that we believe could be the next chief. That's my goal.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Can you talk briefly, I know on January 6th, and I noted this at the beginning, it wasn't only the Capitol Police. There were other law enforcement agencies that stepped in, everyone from the U.S. Marshal Service to the New Jersey State Police, not to mention the National Guards, of course, outside of law enforcement in Maryland and Virginia and D.C. Can you talk about the importance of maintaining strong relationships with law enforcement partners in the capital region? I think that's one of the reasons there was so much interest in you for this job, because you have those relationships, and what steps have been taken to improve the department's coordination and mutual aid agreements? As a former prosecutor, I had 45 police departments in my county, and I was very well aware of how some of the smaller suburban areas and towns needed those mutual aid agreements and needed to pair up with other departments. But this is of course, a major city to major city. Could you talk about the mutual aid agreements?
Yes, and if I can harken back to, and so often, we have folks with so much seniority here. Let me harken back to my younger days when I was a brand new police chief in Fairfax County, and Chuck Ramsey was the brand new police chief in Washington, D.C. And it was Chuck Ramsey that said, "Hey, we have a big event coming. Can you, Chief Manger, send us 150 trained CDU officers to assist with this event?" And he called in regional partners around the Capital Beltway, and was able to get, again, 800-900 police officers here to supplement what he needed. And so I'm a big believer in using the resources that we have in this region, and have done it my whole career. And when I got here, I made those same phone calls to people that I've known for a long time who were leading the agencies around the Beltway, and I said, "Can you help?" And the answer was immediately yes. We've put in a formalized process to request that assistance, and ensure that we get the help that we need. I've got the same relationship with MPD, the same relationship with our federal law enforcement partners, Park Police, and U.S. Secret Service, and we have that relationship with the National Guard. All these things have been formalized, put in place, and we're talking about it ahead of time. So there's not going to be a panicked call, on the day of. It's going to be a more orderly planning process for the events that we think are going to be challenging to us.
Okay, thank you. Just last question. FBI, Department of Justice, continue to investigate the events of January 6th. This is outside of the work, of course, being done in the House, the thorough work. And they have brought over 700 criminal cases related to the attack. We just heard from Senator Cruz in his support for these prosecutions, as well as many others on this committee. Is the Capitol Police continuing to work in coordination with the Department of Justice in its investigations and prosecutions? And do you agree that it's particularly important to hold accountable those who attack Capitol Police officers?
I'm a firm believer that the biggest deterrent for criminal activity is if people think they're going to face consequences for committing a crime. And so I think that anytime you have police officers assaulted, anytime you have a situation like we dealt with on January 6th, people do, if they committed a crime, they should be prosecuted. So, we have been working closely with the Department of Justice. We're working, and this ties into, we haven't talked about it, but as you know, we're starting to have field offices around the country, and our relationships with the local prosecutors there, and the fact that we have attorneys assigned to those field offices, all that is enhancing our reputation for prosecution of threats cases and other cases involving our mission here to protect the Capitol.
Well, thank you very much, Chief. We heard today about the progress you've made, and most importantly, the progress that your officers and what they have done here. I know Senator Blunt and I wish we could have them all in front of us to thank them, because we know in the end, while you are the chief, it's individual officers that are the ones on the front line making decisions every single day about how to handle situations. And I think that on January 6th last year, they didn't have the support that they needed, whether it's the equipment, whether it was a plan, whether it was a direction on that day. And yet they still valiantly did their job. So I just want to reiterate, while you are our witness today, we see all of them before us as well. And my memories of them with the cuts on their faces, the looks on their faces, trying to get senators to safe locations, trying to assure people that they needed to stay where they are and it was going to be okay, and doing the work of even clearing that chamber with the help of others and other frontline staff people so we could go back and finish our job that night. This was not just about, you know, bread and butter doing your job. This was actually about saving our republic, and it is what, to me, makes the Capitol Police such an important agency and such a unique and special agency for our country. So I want to thank you. We are going to continue asking you questions as this goes along, as you know. I will have you back again next year. We will continue to work with the Inspector General. We think that oversight, I know that's not always easy, but it is really important that we continue to have that oversight, and we encourage you to continue your work in recruiting and retaining officers. That appears to be the number one challenge ahead for you and many other chiefs across the country, as well as finding a new and sort of different ways of using your resources and those around the country to protect members, which we've seen, of course, be under more and more threats, and we thank you for that as well. And with that, Senator Blunt, you want to just say a few words here at the end?
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you for having this hearing. I think it's a good opportunity for us to talk to the chief and to think about the great, extraordinary bravery and service that the Capitol Police Force provided, not only on January the 6th, but frankly, every single day. And again, I want to express my great appreciation to their families as well. When they leave to come to work at the Capitol, their family has no idea what they're going to face that day, and that's the case for law enforcement everywhere, but the tempo here is such now that I think it's been a particularly challenging time for families as well. But Chief, as I said just a moment ago, we look forward to continuing to work with you and to talk about your plans for reorganization and what we can do to move forward, and certainly to do everything we can to encourage you as you try to recruit members to get this force back to the level that it needs to be for the safety of everybody involved, and particularly for the safety of the officers and the job they do. So thank you, Chair, and thank you, Chief.